A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, usually we are sitting here waiting for that ping from Daniel on the group chat to see what kind of rabbit hole he is sending us down for the week, but today is a little bit different. The production team actually reached out and suggested we tackle a specific event that has been weighing heavy on everyone in our circles lately.
It really has. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, I am glad we are doing this. Sometimes the news moves so fast that we forget to stop and look at the incredible systems that keep our people safe when things go sideways. And man, did things go sideways in Kuwait last week.
It was a gut punch when the news first broke on February 26th. 3 USA F-15EX Strike Eagle 2s down by friendly fire from Kuwaiti Patriot missile batteries. In a region where tensions are already high and our alliances are the bedrock of stability, an incident like that sends shockwaves through the Pentagon and the State Department. But the headline that really matters, the one that should make every American proud, is that every single crew member, all 6 of them, is back on friendly soil today.
It is a testament to the fact that while technology can fail and communication can break down, the commitment to never leave a man behind is an absolute, non-negotiable part of our military DNA. The moment those pilots punched out and those parachutes blossomed over the northern Kuwaiti desert, a massive invisible machine roared to life to bring them home. It was a textbook display of combat search and rescue, or CSAR, and I think it is the perfect starting point to talk about how we actually do this.
I was reading the preliminary reports from Central Command, and the speed of the recovery was just breathtaking. We're talking about downed airmen in a sensitive border area, potentially surrounded by confusion and panicked ground forces, and yet the first crew was picked up in under 45 minutes. It makes you realize that search and rescue is not just a secondary thought or a nice-to-have capability. It is a core pillar of air power.
It is the moral contract, CORN. When you ask a pilot to fly an $80 million jet into harm's way, you are making a promise. You are saying, if the worst happens, we are coming for you. It does not matter the cost. It does not matter the risk to others. We will move heaven and earth to get you back. That promise is what allows our pilots to fly with the aggression and confidence they need. If they thought they were just an expendable asset, the whole psychology of the cockpit would change.
And that is something we see as a major differentiator between the United States and our allies versus some of our adversaries. You look at how certain regimes treat their soldiers as mere statistics, but for us, every single life represents a massive investment of training, a family back home, and the very honor of the nation. So, let us talk about that invisible machine. When those planes went down near Ali al-Salem, what was the first thing that happened in the shadows?
It all starts with the Joint Search and Rescue Center, or the JSRC. Every major theater of operations has one. They are the nerve center. They are monitoring every transponder, every radio frequency, and every satellite link. The moment an aircraft disappears from the scope or a distress beacon hits the network, the JSRC triggers what we call the execution phase. They do not wait for a formal report. They assume the worst and start moving assets immediately.
We told back in episode 8 FELF about the AWACS and how it acts as the eye in the sky. I imagine those big radar planes play a huge role in this too, right? They are probably the ones who first see the plane drop off the radar.
The E3 Sentry or the newer E7 Wedgetails are often the first to shout the alarm. They can see the trajectory of the aircraft, they can mark the coordinates of the ejection, and they can immediately clear the airspace for the rescue birds. In the Kuwait incident, we had eyes on the situation from the second the missiles left the rails. That situational awareness is what prevents a tragedy from turning into a hostage situation.
But even with the best coordinates in the world, the pilot is still on the ground in potentially hostile territory. Or in this case, in a very confused and dangerous friendly fire zone. That is where the training kicks in. Most people have heard the acronym SERE, but I do not think people realize how grueling that actually is.
SERE stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Every single person who flies in a military cockpit goes through it. It is widely considered one of the most difficult and psychologically taxing schools in the entire military. They take these guys and gals to Fairchild Air Force Base and they drop them in the wilderness with nothing. They hunt them, they capture them in mock scenarios and put them through high-stress interrogations. They want to break them in training so they do not break in reality.
I have talked to a few guys who went through that school, and they say the resistance part is the most haunting. They teach you how to give up just enough information to satisfy a captor without compromising the mission. They teach you how to keep your mind sharp when you are sleep deprived and starving. It is about building a mental fortress. Because if you are a downed pilot, you are the most valuable intelligence asset the enemy can find.
Right? And the evasion part is what we saw play out in Kuwait. You do not just sit by your parachute and wait for a ride. You get away from the silk immediately. You find a concealed position. You use your radio sparingly. You have to think like a ghost. These pilots are trained to use the terrain, to move at night, and to communicate using encrypted bursts that are nearly impossible for the enemy to triangulate. They even carry something called a blood chit, a piece of cloth with a message in multiple languages identifying them as an American and promising a reward for their safe return.
It is interesting you mention the radios. The technology there has jumped forward so much. We are not talking about the old walkie-talkies from the Vietnam era.
No way. Today, they use systems like the CSEL, the Combat Survivor Evader Locator. It is a handheld device that connects to a global satellite network. It sends the pilot's precise GPS coordinates, their health status, and even short text messages, all through a low probability of intercept link. It is basically a direct line to the rescue center that the enemy cannot hear. In the Kuwait incident, those pilots were able to authenticate their identity and provide their exact location before the rescue helicopters even took off.
Which brings us to the heroes of this story, the guys who actually go in and pull them out. The Pararescuemen, or PJs. Their motto is that others may live. And when you look at their training pipeline, it is just insane. It is one of the longest special operations training programs in the world.
It is almost 2 years of constant weeding out. They call it the Superman School for a reason. These guys have to be elite divers, expert mountain climbers, master parachutists, and, on top of all that, they are certified combat paramedics. They are trained to perform surgery in the back of a vibrating helicopter while taking small arms fire. There is no other job like it in the world. They are part of what the Air Force calls the Guardian Angel weapon system.
I remember reading about a PJ who had to perform a tracheotomy on a wounded soldier using a ballpoint pen and some medical tape while hanging from a hoist over a jungle canopy. That is the level of pressure we are talking about. When those PJs jumped out of the HH-60, W Jolly Green 2 helicopters in Kuwait, they were ready for anything. They did not know if they were going to find a pilot with a broken leg or someone who was being closed in on by a local militia.
And that HH-60W is a beast of a machine. It is the new combat rescue helicopter for the Air Force, and it is a massive upgrade over the old Pave Hawks. It has got better armor, more fuel capacity, and an integrated digital cockpit that allows the crew to see threats like surface-to-air missiles in real time. It is designed specifically to go into the teeth of the enemy's air defenses and survive.
It is a whole ecosystem. You have the helicopters doing the pickup, but you also have the HC-130J Combat King 2 circling overhead. Those are the tankers that refuel the helicopters midair so they can stay in the fight for hours. And usually you have a flight of A-10 Warthogs or F-16s providing what we call Sandy protection.
Sandy is the call sign for the rescue escort. Their job is to orbit the survivor and destroy anything that moves toward them. If a truck full of enemy soldiers tries to reach the pilot before the PJs do, the Sandy pilots are going to rain fire on them. They are the sheepdogs. It is this beautiful synchronized dance of air power. You have the high-altitude eyes, the mid-altitude tankers, the low-altitude escorts, and the helicopters on the deck.
It makes you think about how far we have come. You look back at Vietnam, which was really the birth of modern CSAR. Back then, it was much more primitive. We lost so many aircraft and so many men just trying to save a single pilot. You think about the rescue of ICL Hamilton, call sign Bat-21.
That is one of the most famous stories in military history. Hamilton was an electronic warfare expert who was shot down over South Vietnam in 1972. He knew too much. If the North Vietnamese captured him, it would have been a catastrophe for our signals intelligence. We spent 11 days trying to get him out. We lost 5 more aircraft and 11 men died in the rescue attempts. Eventually, a Navy SEAL named Thomas Norris and a South Vietnamese commando had to sneak in on the ground to get him.
11 lives for 1. That is a heavy price. It brings up that difficult question of the math of rescue. When does the risk to the rescuers outweigh the value of the survivor? But the military's answer is almost always, we keep going.
It is a calculated risk, but the calculation is heavily weighted toward the rescue. If you look at the shoot-down of Scott O'Grady in Bosnia back in 1995, that was another incredible one. He was on the ground for 6 days, eating bugs and drinking rainwater. He used his SERE training perfectly. When the Marines finally got the signal, they launched a massive task force from the USS Kearsarge. 2 Super Stallion helicopters, 2 Sea Cobras, and 2 Harriers. They flew into hostile territory, picked him up in less than 7 minutes, and flew out through a hail of missiles.
And then you have the F-117 Nighthawk that was shot down over Serbia in 1999. That was a huge blow because it was our premier stealth fighter. The pilot, Zelko, was rescued in less than 8 hours. The Serbian commander who shot him down, Zoltan Dani, actually moved his missile battery constantly to avoid being targeted. But our CSAR teams were still able to punch through the gaps in his coverage.
What is fascinating about the Serbia incident is that years later, the pilot and the guy who shot him down actually became friends. It shows the human side of this. But from a technical perspective, that rescue was a miracle. We were flying into one of the most dense integrated air defense systems in the world to pick up a guy who had just crashed a top-secret stealth jet.
It really highlights the importance of OPSEC, which we covered in episode 779. If that pilot had used his radio too much, or if a bystander had posted a picture of the crash site to social media back then, the Serbians would have found him in minutes. Today, with everyone having a smartphone, the challenge is even greater.
That is why the technology has to stay one step ahead. In the Kuwait incident, the speed was the deciding factor. The faster you move, the less time the enemy has to react. We call it the golden hour. Just like in civilian medicine, if you can get to a trauma patient within 60 minutes, their chances of survival skyrocket. In CSAR, if you can get to a pilot before the enemy can organize a search party, the mission is almost always a success.
I want to go back to the PJs for a second because I think their role is so unique. Most special forces are trained to break things and kill people. PJs are the only ones whose primary mission is to save lives. They are technical experts in medicine, but they are also lethal warriors. It is a strange paradox.
It really is. They have to be able to fight their way to the survivor, then switch gears instantly to become a calm, methodical medic, and then switch back to a warrior to defend the extraction point. They carry an incredible amount of gear. They have got the standard combat load, but then they are also carrying defibrillators, oxygen tanks, blood products, and extrication tools.
And they do it in the most miserable conditions imaginable. Whether it is a freezing mountaintop in Afghanistan or a swamp in the Pacific, they are going in. I think about the courage it takes to jump out of a perfectly good helicopter into a pitch-black forest where you know people are actively looking to kill you.
It takes a special kind of person. And it is not just the Air Force. The Navy has their own search and rescue swimmers who do incredible work in the open ocean. If a pilot ejects over the water, those guys are jumping into 15-foot swells to pull them into a basket. The Coast Guard does it every day in civilian contexts, but in a combat zone, the stakes are just dialed up to 11.
So, looking at the Kuwait incident, what are the lessons we are going to take away from this? Obviously, we need to look at why our friendly fire protocols failed. That is a huge issue for the AWACS and the command and control teams we discussed in episode 767. But on the rescue side, it seems like a total win.
It was a validation of the new equipment and the training. The fact that all 6 crew members from those 3 jets were recovered so quickly tells me that our investment in the HH-60W and the satellite-linked radios is paying off. It also shows that our coordination with our regional partners is still strong, despite the accident. The Kuwaitis actually helped facilitate the rescue once they realized the mistake.
That is an important point. In a friendly fire situation, the diplomacy is just as important as the hardware. You have to be able to de-escalate the situation on the ground so the rescue teams don't get shot at by the very people they are supposed to be allied with.
Right. And it reinforces the message to our adversaries. If you can't even keep a downed pilot in a friendly fire zone, how do you expect to capture one in a real war? It shows that the American rescue umbrella is wide and it is effective. It is a deterrent in its own right. If an enemy knows they can't use a captured pilot as a political pawn, it changes their strategic calculus.
I also think there is a takeaway for us as civilians. We often look at the military as this giant, impersonal machine. But when you see the lengths they go to for 6 individuals, it reminds you that it is built on personal bonds. Those rescuers likely knew the pilots they were picking up. They eat in the same mess halls. They live in the same housing. It is a family business.
It really is. And the psychological impact on the rest of the wing cannot be overstated. When those crews walked back into the squadron room at Ali al-Salam, every other pilot there breathed a sigh of relief. They knew that if it had been them, the same effort would have been made. That builds a level of unit cohesion that you just can't buy.
I am curious about the future of this. We are seeing more and more work with autonomous systems. Do you think we will ever see a day where the rescue is done by a drone?
There is a lot of talk about that. The Marine Corps has been experimenting with autonomous cargo helicopters like the K-MAX that could potentially be used for medical evacuation. The idea is that you could send in a pilotless craft to a high-threat area where you don't want to risk a PJ crew. But I don't know, Korn. There is something about having a human being there to hold your hand, to look you in the eye and say, "We have got you, you are going home." I don't think a robot can ever replace that psychological component of the rescue.
I agree that human connection is what the motto is all about, that others may live. It is a sacrifice of one person's safety for another's. A machine can't make a sacrifice because it doesn't value its own life.
And the medical side is so complex. A PJ is making split-second decisions about life-saving interventions that require a level of intuition and experience that AI just hasn't reached yet. Maybe for a simple pickup in a clear zone, but in the heat of combat? I want a PJ every time.
It is amazing to think that this whole infrastructure exists, mostly out of sight, until the moment it is needed. It is a massive insurance policy that we pay for every day with our tax dollars and our training hours, and as we saw in Kuwait, it is worth every penny.
It really is. It is one of those things where you hope it never has to be used, but you are so glad it is there when it is, and I think it reflects the best of our values. We are a nation that values the individual. We are a nation that doesn't just treat people as fodder for the machine.
Well said, Herman. I think we have covered a lot of ground today, from the SERE schools to the technical specs of the Jolly Green 2. It is a fascinating world, and one that definitely deserves more recognition.
For sure. If people want to dive deeper into this, I highly recommend looking up some of the individual citations for the Air Force Cross or the Medal of Honor awarded to PJs. The stories are just mind-blowing. People like William Pitzenbarger or John Chapman, their bravery is just on another level.
We will have to do a full episode on some of those individual stories at some point. But for now, I am just glad those crews in Kuwait are safe. It could have been a much darker week.
It really could have. And hey, if you have been listening to us for a while and you appreciate the deep dives we do into these topics, we would love it if you could leave us a review. Whether you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, those ratings really help us reach more people who are interested in this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. We love seeing the feedback, and it helps the algorithm show the podcast to other folks who have a curiosity about the way the world works.
This has been my Weird Prompts. We are the Poppleberry Brothers, coming to you from Jerusalem.
Thanks to the production team for suggesting this one. It was a great way to explore a silver lining in a tough news story. You can find all our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today, at myweirdprompts.com. We have a full archive there, and an RSS feed if you want to make sure you never miss an episode.
Until next time, stay curious and keep an eye on the skies.
Take care, everyone. This has been My Weird Prompts. We will talk to you soon.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My